In 1976, Barry Sheen did something that should have been impossible. He tamed a motorcycle that was trying to kill him. The Suzuki RG500 wasn't just brutal, it was a square 4 two-stroke monster that threw riders off at 150 miles per hour. Most couldn't even stay on it. But Sheen didn't just ride it, he used it to destroy the most dominant dynasty in motorcycle racing history. 15 years of Italian supremacy, gone. Here's the story of how he turned a death trap into a championship weapon. In 1975, Grand Prix motorcycle racing belonged to one name, MV Augusta. For 15 consecutive years, the Italian manufacturer had crushed every challenger with machines that were as beautiful as they were dominant. These weren't just motorcycles, they were rolling works of art built by craftsmen who treated racing like a Renaissance painting. Every component was hand-built, every detail perfected, every victory a testament to Italian engineering excellence. MV Augusta riders had won 37 world championships between 1958 and 1974. Think about that for a second. 37 titles. For a decade and a half, if you wanted to win in the Premier 500cc class, you needed an MV Augusta or you needed to find a different career. Giacomo Agostini alone had won 8 consecutive 500cc world championships on MV machinery. Phil Reed took 2 more titles. These weren't flukes or lucky seasons. This was systematic domination backed by superior engineering and unlimited budgets. The bikes were technological marvels. 4-cylinder 4-stroke engines that screamed to 14,000 RPM, triple disc brakes when most bikes had drums, exotic materials and racing innovations that wouldn't reach production motorcycles for decades. But by 1975, cracks were showing in the Italian empire. Rising costs, changing regulations, and internal politics were weakening MV's grip on the sport. Other manufacturers were getting hungrier, more aggressive, more willing to take risks than conservative Italian management wouldn't consider. At Suzuki headquarters in Japan, engineers were studying those cracks like strategists planning an invasion. They weren't interested in building beautiful motorcycles, they wanted to build weapons, and they had the perfect pilot waiting to pull the trigger. Barry Sheen wasn't your typical motorcycle racer. While other riders approached the sport with reverent respect, Sheen treated it like his personal playground. Born in London in 1950, Sheen grew up around motorcycles. His father dealt in racing bikes, and young Barry was tearing apart engines before most kids could tie their shoes. By age 12, he was racing grass track events. By 15, he was beating adults in scramble competition. But Sheen brought something different to racing, something that hadn't been seen before. Absolute confidence, unshakable confidence, all wrapped in a working-class British attitude. He didn't just want to win races, he wanted to be famous, rich, the center of attention while doing it. Other riders were content to let their racing do the talk. Sheen talked constantly. He courted media attention, dated models, appeared on television shows. He treated motorcycle racing like entertainment rather than a sport. The establishment hated him. Traditional racing culture valued quiet professionalism and respectful behavior. Sheen showed up with his bleached blonde hair, flashy leathers, and opinions about everything. He was loud, brash, and completely unapologetic about it. But beneath the showmanship was a rider of devastating talent. Sheen had natural speed, tactical intelligence, and something even rarer, the ability to stay calm under pressure that would break other riders. He also had something that would prove crucial in the coming battle. He was absolutely fearless about riding motorcycles that other people considered unrideable. By 1973, Sheen had already proven his credentials by winning the Formula 750 World Championship, but that success was just preparation for something bigger. Suzuki was developing a new racing motorcycle based on revolutionary engine design. They needed a rider who could handle power that most people couldn't control. They needed someone who would ride anything if it meant winning. They found Barry Sheen. What Suzuki unleashed in 1974 wasn't just another racing motorcycle. The RG500 was a systematic rejection of everything the motorcycle industry thought they knew about power delivery. The heart of this machine was a 498cc square 4 two-stroke engine that generated power like a natural disaster. 4 cylinders arranged in a square configuration, naturally aspirated with rotary valve induction, producing devastating horsepower through liquid cooling and advanced engineering. But raw power was only part of the story. The real terror came from how that power was delivered. Two-stroke engines don't make power gradually like four-stroke. They build pressure, build pressure, build pressure, then detonate all at once in a violent surge that can catch riders completely off guard. Now imagine that effect multiplied by 4 cylinders all firing in perfect synchronization. The square 4 configuration made everything worse. 4 pistons moving in perfect harmony created vibration patterns that could shake the bike apart at high RPM. The power delivery wasn't smooth acceleration. It was controlled chaos that required constant attention and lightning-fast reflexes. Most riders never made it to full speed. They'd hit the power surge, lose control, and find themselves sliding across the racetrack, wondering what happened. The chassis was built for function, not comfort. Suzuki used an aluminum box section frame that transmitted every vibration, every bump, every imperfection directly to the rider. There was no cushioning, no forgiveness, no accommodation for human limitations. The racing position was severe. Riders crouched low over the tank, weight forward, hanging on with their fingertips as the bike tried to tear itself out of their grip. After 20 minutes of racing, most riders were physically exhausted just from fighting the machine. This wasn't a motorcycle. It was an endurance test disguised as transportation. Sheen's breakthrough came at the 1975 Dutch TT at Assen, where he scored the RG500's first Grand Prix victory. But that single win was just the beginning of something that would change motorcycle racing forever. The victory at Assen wasn't lucky, it was surgical. Sheen had spent months learning to ride the RG500's violent personality, understanding exactly when the power surges would hit, anticipating the chassis flex, compensating for the brutal vibration. What made this victory even more remarkable was the context. Just months earlier, Sheen had suffered a horrific crash during practice for the 1975 Daytona 200, breaking his leg, collarbone, arm, and 2 ribs in a high-speed spill. The injury should have ended his season. Instead, he came back angrier and more determined. While other riders fought their motorcycles, Sheen had learned to dance with his. He could use the savage power delivery as a weapon, timing acceleration bursts to coincide with passing opportunities or defensive maneuvers that left competitors scrambling to respond. The victory sent shockwaves through the Grand Prix paddock. MV Augusta had been beaten by a Japanese 2-stroke that shouldn't have been able to compete with their sophisticated 4-stroke technology. Suzuki had proven that raw power could overcome engineering refinement. More importantly, they'd found a rider who could harness that power consistently. Sheen wasn't just fast on the RG500, he was reliable, calculating, and completely comfortable riding on the edge of disaster. In that single race, watching Sheen toy with Giacomo Agostini just months after his devastating injuries, the motorcycle racing world witnessed the dawn of a new era. The old guard was being challenged by a combination of Japanese engineering brutality and British audacity that would prove unstoppable. The 1976 season began with everyone knowing what was coming. The question wasn't whether Sheen and the RG500 could win races. The question was whether they could sustain championship-level performance over an entire season against the established order. The answer came quickly and brutally. Sheen dominated the 1976 500cc World Championship with a performance so complete it redefined what motorcycle racing dominance looked like. The statistics tell the story of systematic destruction. Sheen won 5 Grand Prix races during the 1976 season, finishing second once and wrapping up his first World Championship with 82 points, beating his Suzuki teammate Teuvo Lansviori by 33 points. But the numbers only capture part of the devastation. What made Sheen's championship truly shocking was how he achieved it. This wasn't close racing decided by luck or strategy. This was mechanical and tactical superiority applied with surgical precision. The RG500 had evolved since the first victory at Assen. Suzuki engineers had refined the power delivery, improved the chassis, and developed the bike into a weapon that could dominate entire races rather than just steal victories. Sheen's riding style had evolved as well. He'd developed techniques for managing the square four's power delivery that other riders couldn't master. Where they fought the bike, he learned to work with its violent nature. The key was understanding that the RG500 wasn't meant to be smooth, it was meant to be devastating. Sheen learned to use the abrupt power surges tactically, timing them to coincide with overtaking opportunities or defensive moves that left competitors struggling to respond. His victories weren't just wins, they were statements. At the Australian Grand Prix, he won by over 30 seconds. At the Swedish Grand Prix, he clinched the championship with a victory that left the competition so far behind, it looks like they were racing different motorcycles. The combination was unstoppable. Sheen could ride the RG500 at 95% of its capability for entire races, something no other rider could sustain. While competitors struggled to manage their machines for 20 laps, Sheen was extracting maximum performance while maintaining complete control. What spectators saw was Sheen winning races. What engineers understood was that Suzuki was conducting the most successful development program in motorcycle racing history, using Grand Prix competition as their laboratory. Every race provided data about chassis setup, power delivery, suspension tuning, and aerodynamics. Sheen provided feedback that helped engineers refine the bike's behavior while developing techniques for managing its violent tendencies. The RG500's development philosophy was revolutionary. Instead of trying to make the motorcycle easier to ride, Suzuki made it more effective and found a rider skilled enough to handle the increased performance. Other manufacturers were taking the opposite approach. They were trying to build bikes that average riders could manage, sacrificing ultimate performance for accessibility. Suzuki decided that if only one rider in the world could handle their motorcycle at full capability, they'd find that rider and give him every advantage possible. This created a feedback loop that accelerated development beyond what anyone thought possible. Sheen would push the bike to its limits during practice and racing, identifying exactly where improvements were needed. Suzuki engineers would analyze his feedback and implement changes between races. The result was visible in lap times. Early in 1976, the RG500 was competitive with the best MV Agustas. By the end of the season, it was lapping faster than anything else on the grid by significant margins. But the technological advantages weren't just about power. Suzuki had developed suspension systems that could handle the Square 4's brutal torque delivery. They'd created chassis geometry that converted the engine's violent character into straight-line speed and cornering stability. The bike was becoming more brutal with each development cycle, but also more controllable for a rider with Sheen's skills. It was evolving into something that only he could fully exploit. What Sheen and the RG500 accomplished in 1976 wasn't just winning a championship. They dismantled a racing empire that had seemed unbreakable and established new rules for how motorcycle racing would be conducted. The psychological impact on competitors was devastating. Riders who had spent their careers chasing MV Augusta suddenly found themselves competing against a machine that made their bikes look obsolete. Every race where Sheen dominated made the established technology appear primitive. Pat Hennen, the American rider who became the first US rider to win a 500cc Grand Prix that season at the Finnish GP, later described the effect. You'd line up on the grid knowing that unless Barry made a mistake or had mechanical problems, you were racing for second place. That's not racing, that's demoralization. The impact extended far beyond just race results. Sheen's personality made the defeat even more devastating for the establishment. He wasn't a respectful challenger who deferred to racing tradition. He was a working-class British kid who celebrated victories like personal conquests and treated defeats of legendary riders as entertainment. Other manufacturers were forced to respond. Yamaha, Honda, and Kawasaki all began developing more aggressive racing programs. The entire sport was being dragged into a new era where performance mattered more than heritage. But copying the RG500's technology wasn't enough. The bike's success required a rider who could handle its violent character. Most riders couldn't extract its full potential. The dominance was so complete that by the end of 1976, Suzuki RG500s filled 9 of the top 10 positions in the World Championship standings. This wasn't just one exceptional rider. This was technological superiority so overwhelming that even average riders on RG500s could beat exceptional riders on other machinery. MV Augusta's response was telling. Instead of developing new technology to compete, they began withdrawing from Grand Prix racing. The Italian manufacturer that had dominated for 15 years decided that competition against the RG500 was economically unsustainable. The old guard was dead. A new era had begun. Sheen's 1976 championship came with costs that wouldn't become apparent until later. The physical demands of riding the RG500 at competitive speeds for an entire season were destroying his body in ways that wouldn't heal. The violence of the Square 4 engine created vibration patterns that caused long-term nerve damage in riders' hands and arms. The severe racing position required to control the bike put enormous stress on backs and necks. The mental concentration needed to manage the power delivery was exhausting in ways that affected riders for years. Sheen was absorbing all of this damage while maintaining the public persona of a carefree celebrity who made motorcycle racing look effortless. Behind the scenes, he was managing pain and injury that would have sidelined most riders. The 1975 Daytona crash had left him with injuries that never fully healed. The pins and plates holding his bones together were constant reminders of how close he'd come to career-ending damage. Every race on the RG500 was adding stress to repairs that weren't designed to handle the punishment. But Sheen understood something that his competitors didn't. The window for this kind of dominance was limited. Regulations would change, other manufacturers would catch up, and his body would eventually refuse to handle the punishment. He had to maximize his advantage while it existed. The 1976 season was his opportunity to establish himself as more than just another talented rider. It was his chance to become a legend who changed the sport forever. He succeeded, but the victory came with a price that would follow him for the rest of his career. Sheen's championship transcended motorcycle racing and created cultural changes that extended far beyond the sport. He became the first motorcycle racer to achieve genuine celebrity status, appearing on television shows, dating famous women, and treating his racing career as entertainment rather than just competition. This was revolutionary. Previous racing champions were respected within the motorcycle community but remained largely unknown to the general public. Sheen changed that by making himself accessible, entertaining, and impossible to ignore. His success on the RG500 gave him a platform that he used brilliantly. He appeared on game shows, gave interviews to mainstream media, and made motorcycle racing seem glamorous rather than dangerous. He was selling the sport to audiences who had never considered attending a race. The impact was measurable in attendance figures and television ratings. Grand Prix races began drawing larger crowds, partly because spectators wanted to see the bike that was dominating so completely, but also because they wanted to see the rider who made it look effortless. Sheen's influence extended to motorcycle manufacturing as well. The success of the RG500 inspired manufacturers to develop high-performance street bikes that borrowed technology from racing. The concept of the superbike as a marketing category can be traced directly to the public interest generated by Sheen's racing success. More importantly, he proved that motorcycle racing could be profitable entertainment. Previous generations of racers had treated competition as a hobby or passion that happened to pay the bills. Sheen approached it as a business opportunity that could generate wealth and fame for those skilled enough to excel. By 1977, every manufacturer in Grand Prix racing was scrambling to build their own version of the RG500. The problem was that copying the technology wasn't enough. They also needed riders who could handle the brutal power delivery. Yamaha developed the TZ500, Honda created the NS500, Kawasaki built the KR500. All of them used square 4 two-stroke engines. All of them tried to match the RG500's devastating performance. None of them succeeded. The issue wasn't engineering capability. Japanese manufacturers could build engines that produced similar horsepower. They could create a chassis that handled similar speeds. What they couldn't replicate was the combination of machine and rider that made Sheen and the RG500 unbeatable. Sheen had spent 3 years learning to extract maximum performance from a motorcycle that wanted to kill its rider. Other racers were starting from zero on similar machines without the development time that made Sheen so dominant. The result was a generation of racing motorcycles that were fast enough to win, but too dangerous for most riders to exploit fully. Manufacturers found themselves in an arms race where they could build competitive machinery but couldn't find riders skilled enough to use it effectively. This created one of the strangest periods in motorcycle racing history. The grids were filled with incredibly powerful machines capable of winning races, but only a handful of riders had the skill and courage necessary to extract their full potential. Sheen maintained his advantage by continuing to develop his techniques while competitors struggled to catch up. He wasn't just riding faster, he was riding smarter, using 3 years of experience to exploit weaknesses in the RG500's character that other riders were still discovering. The competition was getting closer, but Sheen stayed ahead by understanding his machine better than anyone else understood theirs. Winning one championship could be attributed to luck, perfect timing, or a superior motorcycle. Winning 2 consecutive championships while everyone else is copying your technology requires something more. It requires absolute mastery. Sheen's 1977 season was even more impressive than his 1976 championship because he achieved it while facing improved competition riding similar machinery. The field was faster, more competitive, and specifically designed to beat the RG500 advantage. He responded by winning 6 Grand Prix races and claiming his second consecutive world championship. But the victories were different from 1976. Instead of dominating through superior technology, he was winning through superior skill and racecraft. The bike had evolved as well. Suzuki's engineers had extracted even more performance from the square 4 engine while improving reliability and handling. The 1977 RG500 was faster and more brutal than its predecessor, requiring even greater skill to manage effectively. Sheen rose to the challenge. His lap times were consistently faster than the previous year. His racing was more tactical, more calculated, and more devastating when he chose to attack. He had transformed from a fast rider on a superior motorcycle into the most complete racer in the world. The 1977 championship proved that 1976 wasn't a fluke. Sheen and the RG500 weren't just good for one exceptional season. They had established a level of performance that would define motorcycle racing for the rest of the decade. Competitors were forced to acknowledge that they weren't just facing superior technology. They were racing against a rider who had reached a level of skill that made conventional competition strategies obsolete. The RG500 was slowly destroying Sheen's body. The square 4's vibration damaged nerves in his hands and arms. The racing position created chronic back problems. His 1975 Daytona injuries never fully healed. But Sheen couldn't show weakness. He maintained his invincible public image while managing pain that would have ended other careers. He was racing against time before his body gave out. The RG500 continued racing until 1987, winning 7 consecutive manufacturers' championships for Suzuki. But the bike's real legacy was proving that brutal machinery could redefine what was possible in racing. Sheen showed that the rider could tame the untamable. His combination of skill and showmanship transformed motorcycle racing from niche sport into mainstream entertainment. Today, surviving RG500s sit in museums. They represent an era when pure performance mattered more than safety, when racing was more dangerous and more spectacular than today. Sheen's domination remains unmatched. No one has since combined superior technology with personal skill to achieve such complete destruction of the established order. Would you have been brave enough to twist the throttle on a machine that most professional racers couldn't handle? More importantly, would you have had the skill to turn its violent nature into a championship-winning advantage? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more videos about riders who refuse to accept the impossible, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell.